Hi, this is Linda, and we're going to be doing using rubrics for student assessment. So if you need the handbook, you can email me, but it's also available on my faculty center. So let me share my screen with you. And you can see the handbook that we're going to be working from. So the guiding questions that we're using today are: what are rubrics? What are the characteristics of a good rubric? What tools can I use to create a rubric? What are the best practices for using rubrics? What are strategies for using rubrics in my classroom? How can I use rubrics in my online class, and specifically D2L? And where can I go for more information? So the things that are going to be covered in this handbook is, first of all, we're going to do a little exploration, just a little fun little exercise. We're going to do an overview of rubrics, a little test, applying a rubric, hands-on, actually creating a rubric in D2L. We're going to talk about some of the best practices, and then evaluating a rubric, and then we're going to use the specifics on how to use these rubrics in D2L, and then more resources about where you can go for more information, or just sample rubrics. So first of all, we're going to do a little exploration. And so what I want you to do is to go to images.google.com. And with me today, we have two other people with us today. Debbie Isaacson and Joey Tober-Clark. So when I'm talking, that's also who I'm talking to. So, so are you there?
I'm had to do it on my phone because
Okay.
It's still loading my profile. So.
Still on your profile? Okay.
Yep.
And so what you want to search for, so let me open up a browser. And we're going to just go to Google. Images.google.com. And we want to type in a search term, rubrics. You might type in discussion forum rubric, or rubric, some other rubric that you're interested in. I'm going to go ahead and type in discussion forum rubric. And as you can see, it has a whole bunch of different rubrics. And so what I want you to do is to take about 5 minutes or so and look at the different rubrics and see what other elements can you identify in a rubric? What's the same about the rubrics? What's different? And what do you think makes a quality rubric? So if you're watching this video, I want you to do that exercise, pause it, do this exercise, and come back in about 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, so here's an example that I pulled up on Google, and as you can see in this specific rubric, there's lots of detail. So this is the #1 place I go to when I'm creating a new rubric, and I have no idea what the criteria should be, just to give me an idea of what the criteria should be and some of the finer points that need to be considered when you're evaluating that criteria. So that just gives you an idea of what's there. And so let's take a little list. Let's look at an overview of the different types of rubrics. So for you in the classroom, this is page 3. So there's basically 3 types of assessment tools that when people say rubrics, they think about. One is a checklist, which is simply just a list of criteria, and points can be assigned based on whether or not that item was completed. An analytic rubric is the most common form and provides performance descriptions for each set of criteria. The next one is a holistic rubric that combines several criteria together and puts an emphasis on the overall performance rather than the specific elements. So when you design the rubric, the things that you're looking for is across the top are the levels of performance, or the scale. And it goes like, it's best practice to do the best, yes and more, on the left, and the not so good on the right. You have a criteria for each row and descriptions in each of those cells. So here's an example of an analytic rubric, is that you have the criteria down the side, you have the levels, excellent, good, needs improvement, unacceptable, and you have the text inside each cell that describes, for this criteria, for this level, this is the expected performance. So I did my doctoral research on rubrics, and more specifically, I did it on a tool, Rubrystar, that we'll talk about at the end, that can be used for creating rubrics. And part of the research shows that students do best when you give them a rubric. Actually under two conditions. One, that they have a rubric that clearly defines what the performance should be. And two, if you actually provide them models that illustrate good and poor performance. So rubrics can make a difference in the quality of the work that you receive from students. So let's check our understanding. For us here, it's page 5. So how would you classify this rubric? Is it a checklist, an analytic rubric, or a holistic rubric?
Go out on a limb and say checklist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why?
Because you just check some boxes on what you think their standard is. but
Right.
The standards don't have any description.
They don't have any descriptions. Very good.
Okay.
So then what's this one on the next page? How would you classify this rubric?
Analytic?
And why do you think it's analytic versus a holistic rubric?
Because I don't know what a holistic one is.
Well, this is an example of a holistic rubric, where it's combining several elements into one.
Okay.
And so,
More confusing that way?
well, it just depends on what you want. So they're looking at it holistically. So they want to see it as a whole versus just each particular item. So for example, this doc design and language use is grouped together for 1.5, for, the outcomes, okay? So that's a holistic rubric. So let's go to this next one. And what would you say that one is?
It would have to be analytic, right?
Right, analytic, right.
It's the only one left.
The only one left. So because you have a criteria and it's pretty narrow and the descriptions are very specific. So again, like you noticed on the checklist, you have the items, but you don't have any descriptors about each level of performance. And on this holistic rubric, there's several criteria grouped together, and sometimes they do tend to be very complex. But they're looking at performance as a whole and not each specific item. Whereas the analytic rubric is useful when you want to build skills in specific discrete areas. Okay, so we're going to review the rubric on this next page, which is page 10. So go ahead and have that open. And what I'm going to do, hopefully this YouTube video works. I didn't check that one out. We're going to watch this YouTube video and see, you're going to apply the rubric to this video. Yes, it's there.
Tonight we're here to pay tribute to great television personalities and characters of our day. Celebrities and actors alike, we're here to celebrate a great art form that it's so easy for us to take for granted, just sitting back on our couch, flipping the channels on a remote. The next speaker that I'd like to bring to the stage has made a name for herself as a legend. She began her broadcasting career while she was still in high school at WVOL Radio in Nashville, Tennessee. At the age of 19, she became the very first African-American female news anchor at WTVF television station in Nashville, Tennessee. It was in 1984 that she began starring in her very own talk show, which would eventually become the most widely broadcast talk show in television history. broadcast in over 100 different countries and an array of different languages. It was in 1988, just 4 years after beginning her own talk show, that she became the third woman in American broadcasting history, after Mary Pickford and Lucille Ball, to own her own studio, Harpo Studios. As a philanthropist, she's established her own private charity, which has successfully awarded millions of dollars to underprivileged students with merit but no means, established orphanages, and as a global humanitarian effort, provided education, food, and shelter to those with no means. It was in April of 2000 that she introduced her own monthly magazine that is credited to be the most successful magazine launch in recent history. One of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world today, and the recipient of the United Nations Global Humanitarian Action Award. It is my great privilege to introduce to you Oprah.
So, and for those of them that are listening to the tape, go ahead and type in the URL and listen to the video yourself. So, for those of us here, was it easy to apply this rubric?
Yes, however, while he was talking, I was reading it because I wasn't familiar with it yet.
Okay,
So it was hard to apply it without looking at it, but
okay,
I was able to catch up. It wasn't real hard. So, yeah.
okay. So, did the language of the rubric make it easy to pick one cell versus another cell?
I thought it was kind of the same.
You thought it was kind of the same, so it wasn't.
Mhm.
There wasn't a very clear distinction between A performance, B performance, and
Mhm.
C performance.
I mean, the language is clear, I just didn't know. Like, for example, the first one, enthusiasm, they kind of seem all the same.
Okay, and so that's one of the things that when you develop a rubric that you want to be sure clear is that there's a clear delineation between excellent performance and the next level and the next level. So then, did it cover everything that you wanted to evaluate? So would you give this guy an A? Or based upon the rubric, maybe yes, but was he actually A performance? Were there things that you would have liked to have said, like,
I don't know what his
His-
objectives were, so.
right, his slouching, or, he wasn't very animated, or, so that's the other thing about what you'll find when you use your rubrics is that when you actually get down to it, it's really not evaluating the key things that you want evaluated. So that's one of the things to think about when you do the rubrics is that it's not a one and done. A lot of times you have to go back and update your rubrics after you use them. So, and then were there things in the rubric that just didn't really seem important? So that's the other thing that happens. Sometimes we focus in on the minutia that doesn't really have a big.
Well, on the speaks clearly, I thought that was kind of a yes or a no.
Okay.
To me, that wasn't a gradient. Like mispronounces one word, mispronounces more than one word. You either
Yeah, we
mispronounce them or you don't.
Yeah.
To me, it's a either or, not
Right.
a gradient.
Exactly,
So-
and I was sitting here thinking, well, I'm not gonna focus on the rest of the presentation if I'm sitting here tabulating how many
One
times
word,
they,
right.
yeah.
And so, and then finally, it's like, could this rubric be used to actually accurately provide the student with the final grade?
Yeah.
So those are some of the things you want to look at as you apply a rubric. So now what we want to do is that we're going to create a rubric. And so rubrics can be very difficult and time-consuming to create. Sometimes it could take 1 to 2 hours developing a rubric from scratch. Like I mentioned, I did my doctoral research on RubyStar, which is a tool to help you develop rubrics. And what my research found for teachers that taught K through 12 is that if they were to sit down and develop a rubric by themselves, it would take about 45 to 50 minutes. But if they used RubyStar, it took them 5 to 7 minutes. So there's an art to being able to do that. First of all, you need to decide what kind of rubric you want. Do you really just need a checklist, or do you need an analytic rubric or a holistic rubric? And then you want to brainstorm the list of dimensions. And that's what I've found is very useful about doing that Google search that we did earlier. Sometimes that gives me ideas about the different elements that I should be evaluating. Then you want to look at an actual piece of student work to make sure that the elements you've identified are actually covering everything that you want to have considered. Then determine the levels of performance, 3, 4, or more columns. What we found from our experience is that you really do want at least 4 levels, an A level, a B level, a C level, and then unacceptable or needs improvement level. That's just what we found from our experience is works best. Then you want to find descriptive names, and I've given you some different examples there. Then for each of the cell combinations, you want to provide a description. And as we've discussed, you want to make sure that it's very clear that the A level is different from the B level from the C level. And then if you're using scoring, you want to provide a score for each of those levels. In a lot of times, like in D2L, you have the option that each row has the same number of points, but it can be customized so that more important things can have more points versus less important things. And then you want to evaluate your rubric for effectiveness. Does it, you test it on a sample student product. Revise the rubric, try it again, and then share your rubric with students. That was one of the things that came out of my research as well, is that there were a lot of teachers that would have a rubric, but they never showed it to their students in advance. And you're really missing out on one of the true benefits of having a rubric. And this is one of my joys of working here in the School of Nursing just recently, is that we had a faculty member that inherited a course from another instructor, and she's going through it, and all of a sudden she gets an email from one of her students that, we've got this assignment, where's the rubric? And she looked, she said, well, Linda, there's no rubric for this assignment. And so for me, that says that we've actually changed the culture of the School of Nursing and the benefit and value of having a rubric. So, and as we mentioned, rubrics, there's something that needs to be developed over time to be perfected. So some of the best practices when you use a rubric are, and this is page 12, is that you want it to cover the right content, that you want it to be well organized. And in that terms, I tend to put the most important or weighted items at the top, and then as they become less important down towards the bottom. That the number of levels fits the targets or the users, whether you have 3, 4, 5 levels. That those levels are very well defined, that they're very distinct from each other, and that the levels are parallel. That if you mention a topic in the first level, you also identify in the last level how that particular topic does or doesn't fit. Meaning that you shouldn't mention things in the top level that aren't considered in all the other levels. Does that make sense? So then there's different ways that you can use rubrics. And so obviously we can use it for grading, but you can also use it for formative assessment. So for example, the idea of if you have students that are writing a paper, they submit the draft, you grade them on the rubric, they can see where where they need to make improvements, and so when they get graded on the final, you can show this improvement over time. Self-assessment, you can have students fill out a rubric on their own work so that you can see how are they seeing things versus how you see things. Peer assessment, if you want your students to do a peer assessment, a rubric is a good way to do that. Track and document skill development over time. And this is kind of one of the things that we were getting to with the graduate programs have a writing rubric now that we're using in all the classes. And we should be able to actually track student improvement and performance over time. And then I actually was in one class where we customized the assessment based upon student needs. So the faculty member had a rubric of maybe 12 items, and I got to pick the 6 or 7 items that were relevant to me. And so that's the way that you can customize it. You can also have the ability to engage your students in the process. So you can design the rubric and go over it with your students. You can design the rubric and show models of good and poor performance, how that illustrates those different elements. You can design a rubric with students' input. You can allow students to select what elements apply to their work. And if you have students use the rubric, you can highlight the items in the rubric, and then they can highlight the items in the product or the assignment to demonstrate the performance. So you can say, point to this little piece here, demonstrates that I've completed this. So these are some of the things we've already mentioned. We're going to evaluate the rubric on the next page. And this is on page 14. And so what I want you to look at is, does it cover the right content? Is it well organized? Does the number of levels fit the target and the users? Are the levels defined well? Are the levels parallel? So one of the big issues I have, so do you have any comments so far?
The only comment on this rubric is that there's a range within it, so from 8 to 10 or 7 to 8. So that's just a little different.
Right, so that's kind of problematic. That doesn't work well when you do an electronic rubric, does it? And if you notice, you have overlap too, that you can have 8 points for level 1 and 8 points for level 2.
Oh, I didn't even notice that, yeah.
So that's not clearly defined. The parallel, like they've done really good with the parallel items in most of the cases where they're talking about it. Do you think this is an analytic rubric or a holistic rubric?
Maybe more holistic?
Yes, they have a lot of things crammed into one cell, don't they? So do you think that's going to be easy? So what if they're okay on responsiveness and the number of entries, but so like in the first cell they have like 5 items there. What happens if they're good on 3 of them but not good on 2?
I guess that's the range.
That's the range, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it does become very problematic. It's one of the benefits of a rubric too is that it tends to make your scoring more objective rather than subjective. And so here there's a lot of subjectiveness into, I'm going to give you this versus that. So so those are some of the things to look at that can be problematic as you develop rubrics. So now we're going to develop a rubric in D2L. And what I tend to do is I like to map out my rubric in Excel before I actually put it into D2L. I found that to be easiest. And so there are certain assumptions. Most of the time you'll be using an analytic rubric, and there's certain assumptions. One is that you're going to define a rubric with 3 or 4 levels. And right now the default in D2L is to have 4 levels. The descriptions between each level should be very clear. You can only select a given cell. There is no space between 2 cells. Each cell is given a specific number of points, and ranges of points for a given cell are not possible. However, you can override the points. The points in the leftmost column will total the maximum number of points for the assignment. And the rubric is scored from 0. So in that case, I actually like my right-hand column to be 0. And again, if you're looking for descriptions of what needs to go in each cell, you can do this Google search that we talked about before. So what you're going to use, if you're going to go ahead and log in, we'll go ahead and create the rubric.
It shut me down, so I just.
Oh, it did? Oh. You want to use another laptop?
No, I've actually built one in D2L. So.
Okay, so you're fine. Okay.
Yeah.
And I kind of have.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and go through it for the team. Okay. So we're going to put these directions here, and I'm going to open up D2L. And so I'm just going to my sandbox, which if you don't have one, you can request from the help desk. And assessment rubrics. And I'm just going to click on new rubric. And one of the nice things is in the latest version of D2L of Brightspace, they've allowed all the rubrics to be on one form. It used to be broken down into piece parts, but now it's just one page that you can enter things in. So I can enter in discussion form rubric. And I'm going to put my levels excellent. And actually, let's do excellent, good, average, needs improvement. Now, by default, it gives you an analytic rubric, and it also scores it by points. When you score it by points, each row all has this, for a given level, each row has the same number of points. I like to do custom points, because that allows me to give different points for the different criteria. And so I'm going to pull up a discussion forum rubric. That we can use as a basis to go on. Let me, I think I've moved all the rubrics out though. We can use the rubric. There's a rubric at the bottom of this book that we can use. And so here's quality of discussion. So you just type in a label for each of the levels. You type in the labels for the criteria. And if you need to add criterion, you just add criterion. And then what I like to do as well, so then I have, in this rubric, there's only 3 columns. So I'm actually going to get rid of this middle average column. So I have excellent, good, needs improvement. So this first one is 6 points, 4 points, 0 points. And then I just go to this first cell, I copy it over, and I paste it in. Go to the second cell, copy it over, and paste it in. Copy it over, and paste it in. And so you just do that for the remainder. The final thing that you want to do is this overall score. We got rid of this level, so we're getting rid of it here. Is that this is what this overall score, so you want to repeat the columns from above. And so this rubric, if I add it up, the points. It would be a total of 18 points. So my excellent is 90% of 18. Well, let's make this easier for myself. That's 5 points. So now it's 20. So excellent would be at the 90% level, so that would be 18 points. Good would probably be at the 70% level, so that would be 14 points. And so that's kind of how you figure that out. When you're done with the rubric, you click on close, and it brings it back here. If you want to preview the rubric, you can drop down the arrow. To edit again, you click on edit, click on preview, and you can see how the rubric would be developed there. So, so let's go back up to actually how do you add these rubrics to items in D2L. So here's an example of a completed rubric. So to add them in D2L, if you're adding to an assignment or Dropbox, drop down assignments, assessments, click on assignments. You find an assessment or an item, edit assignment. And if you scroll down, see here it is, add rubric. So I can add a rubric, add selected. The default rubric, and go on. Okay, so that's how you add it for assessments. If you want to add it to a discussion, and I'm not sure if my sandbox has a discussion yet, I can come down here and I can edit the topic, drop down the arrow, edit the topic. Then here it's under assessment. Here's add rubric, discussion forum rubric, and add selected. Now there's another way that you can add rubrics for discussions, and that is you can add it to the grade item. And one of the idiosyncrasies of D2L is when students get graded on a rubric with a discussion, they don't see how you've graded the piece parts unless you associate with the gradebook. But most people don't do that, so I'll just leave that for your reference. So once you have something and you want to grade it, how you use the rubric, let's see if anybody submitted anything. See, we have one submission here. I drop down the arrow, I click on View Submissions, and then I can click on this. Oh, I didn't associate the rubric with it though. Yes, there is a rubric with it. So here's the assignment, pops up, and here's the rubric. See this little grid? You click on it. And what it allows you to do is you can just click on the different items that they've done. And then you can click on Save and Record. And it puts the score in here. And you can put your feedback. And we can click on Update. So that's how you can grade an assignment. If you're going to grade a discussion, what I've found is that, let's see, back to submissions, is here we'll go to grades, and this course doesn't have any discussions in it. So let me take you to one of my existing courses. On grades. And you can see the little bubbles. This tells me that they have a discussion here. I need to pause that. What I do is I drop down, I do grade all. And then I can just click on the bubble. And I can have checked different items, given the feedback. And so that's how grading a discussion can work. Then if you grade it in the grade book, the directions for doing that are there as well. So some of the resources that we have is RubyStar. And this is the tool that I worked on. And at the time that I worked on my dissertation, 11 years ago, more than 600,000 teachers a month were using RubyStar to develop rubrics. So let's say you wanted to find out something about nursing. Let's say if there's any nursing rubrics. And there's a rubric for a nursing care plan. It says it's a demo rubric, so we won't go into that one. Care nursing map. Okay, so let's look at this one. And so it's a maternal child clinical experience rubric. And so again, we talked about using Google as a way to get ideas of different criteria. You can also go to RubriStar and see. It's just that a lot of times the rubrics aren't always complete, but you can also, this is another place that you can go to get different ideas about how things might work. The other resources that we have is Intel Assessing Projects. This is a more sophisticated tool that emphasizes higher order thinking skills. And then here's a resource from the University of Hawaii on just an overview of creating and using rubrics. So the final thing that is in your handbook is here's a sample rubric for a discussion board, and here's a sample rubric for a semester-long project, and in this case, it's a marketing plan. So I'm really glad to have you here today, and it's nice to know about rubrics. It's definitely can make a difference in the overall performance that you can expect from your students.